Shabbos Perek Zayin Mishnah Aleph. Klal Gadol Amr b'Shabbos. The Chachamim said a major rule about the chiyuv chatos for somebody who's mechal Shabbos. So a person who mistakenly performed malach on Shabbos is mechuyev to bring korban chatos. However, if he mistakenly did many malachos on Shabbos or on many Shabbosos or Shabbosim, he's not necessarily liable to bring an offering, a chatos, for each malacha that he performed or for each Shabbos that he was mechalel. That depends on the type of shegeg that he made. Our Mishnah is going to discuss three kinds of mistakes that a person might make and how they can affect the number of chata'os that the person must bring. So, Klal Gadol Amr b'Shabbos, the Chacham said a major halacha about the chiyuv chatos for somebody who's mechal Shabbos. Kol hashechech ikar Shabbos v'asam malachas harbe b'Shabbos harbe. This is the first one. Anyone who forgot the basic chiyuv, the basic mitzvah to be shomer Shabbos, and as a result performed many malachas on many Shabboses, so he's only mechuyev one chatas to be mechaper for all of them. Okay, that's number one. Number two is hayedeh ikir Shabbos v'asam malachas harbe b'Shabbos harbe chayav al kol Shabbos is Shabbos. Someone who knows that there's an isser to do malacha on Shabbos, but forgot that day was Shabbos, and as a result performed many malachas on many Shabbos, thinking that Shabbos was a weekday. For example, he lost track of the days of the week, and he kept thinking that Shabbos was Friday, and after several weeks he discovered his mistake. So chayav al kol achas achas, he's mechuyev to bring separate chatas for each Shabbos that he was mechalel. Here, each chilul Shabbos is viewed as a separate mistake. This is because it's unlikely for a person to go through an entire week without discovering which day of the week it is. Right? That's sort of why the Gemara has to say that the case that we're talking about here is a person that's in the desert and he taka has no idea what day it is. And number three is hayedea shehu Shabbos v'asam malachas harbe b'Shabbos harbe chayav kol av malacha malacha. Somebody who knows that the day is Shabbos, but he forgot which malachas were aser, and as a result performs many malachas on many Shabboses. So he's mechuyev to bring a separate chatos for each av malacha that he did. Now, ha'oisa malachas harbe be'ein malacha achas ein chayav el chatos achas. In the previous case, that the person must bring several karbonos because each malacha he was over on belongs to a separate av malacha. The Mishnah now teaches a halacha for the case in which the malachas he violated, he was mechalel, all belong to the same category. So ha'oisa malachas harbe me'ein malacha achas, someone who performs many malachas that are similar to one av malacha, that is, they are the taldus of this av malacha, so ein chayav el chatas achas, he's mechuyev to bring only one karban chatas to be mechaper for each one of them. Okay, that is Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Beis is going to list the lamatas malachas that we could spend a very, very long time going through each one. So we'll go through them relatively quickly, maybe a ha'ara or two, or not even on each malacha. So Mishnah Beis avos malachas arba'am chaser achas. The number of avos malachas is 40 minus 1, which is 39. Why does the Mishnah have to talk like that? So it's borrowed from the Mishnah in Malkus, where it's used to talk about the chiyuv of Malkus, where it really means 39 midrabanon. But it seems unnecessary for the Mishnah to say the total number of avos malachas, but we could find out for ourselves simply by counting them. The Gemara explains that the Mishnah specified the number to teach that if a person did every malacha possible, including all the taldas, he's mechuyev to bring no more than 39 chatos, because one who performs an av together with his talda, it only is mechuyev to bring one carbon. It's interesting because there's machlokes in the Gemara about this. It's whole character. We mentioned this previously, that if a person is over on an av and is over on a talda, so then he has to bring for the av and he has to bring for the talda as well. Fine. So what are the avos malachas? So the first 11 malachas are steps in the process of making bread. In the process of making dyes to color the mishkan's curtains and coverings, it was necessary to use certain ingredients that were made from certain herbs. So the first malachas were performed in the growing preparation and the cooking of these herbs and dyes. The Mishnah, however, lists them in the context of making bread, as is evident from the 11th malacha, which is baking, as opposed to mavashel, which is cooking the dye. The Tana chose to describe the steps of making bread because that process is more common than making dyes. And if you take a look at the Gemara Brachas and Daf Nun Ches, it goes through these things also, that this is what Adam Rishon did. This is all the things that Adam Rishon did not have to do in order to make bread, because the bread was already prepared for him. Now these are the 11 steps that we have to do that. Zereya is planting. This also refers to sowing seeds in the ground, planting saplings, and anything that would cause vegetation to spread or grow. So watering plants and trees is also a tolda of zereya. Chayresh is plowing. The Av Malacha includes making a furrow in the ground and digging a hole in which you're going to plant. The Malacha comprises of any act improving the ground to make it more suitable for planting, like even smoothing bumps in the ground. Kaitzer is cutting what's growing, detaching any growing plants from a source. The Gemara talks about that taking a fish out of the water is detaching it from its life source, also going to be a chiv of Kaitzer. Ma'amer is gathering. The harvested crop is gathered into small bundles in the field, which are later gathered into one large bundle. And both acts are opposite this malacha. Sticking dates together to make round cake of pressed figs is also a told of this malacha. Then you have dash, threshing. This is detaching the kernels of grain from their husks. So that would the taldas of this would be include milking animals and squeezing from liquid from grapes and olives. Then you have zoira, winnowing. After the kernels are detached from the husks, the mixture is tossed in the air with a pitchfork. The wind blows away the chaff, which is the husks, the stems, and the leaves, leaving the heavier kernels. This malacha is the first of three, which one removes unwanted items that are mixed together with wanted items, right? So that's the Gemara says that Hainu Zaira, Hainu Baira, Hainu Merake. Boirer is selecting. After winnowing, the next step in the bread making process is picking out or removing any pebbles or stones that are mixed among the kernels of grain. In general, this malacha involves removing by hand or utensil unwanted matter from that which is wanted, taking the bad from the good. Toichen is grinding, which would be grinding into flour or cutting vegetables into very small pieces. Merake is sifting. After the kernels of grain were ground into flour, the flour is placed in a sieve and shaken. So Zair Hainu Bair, Hainu Zair, Hainu Merake all have one purpose: to remove unwanted matter from the mixture. The Mishnah counts them as three separate aves because they are performed in three separate stages. Zaira, one winnows the chaff from the kernels. Then Bair, one separates the pebbles from the kernels. And then after the kernels have been ground into flour, after Teichen, then we do Merake to purify it weiter. Lush is kneading the dough. It's making a mixture, and Oifa is baking, or Mevashel, cooking. Even if it's not specifically for food, the malach is defined as using fire to soften a hard item or harden a soft item. Like even melting wax or heating clay to make earthenware is also going to be a malacha of Oifa. Now the next 13 malachas are stages in the process of making cloth. The following 13 malachas were performed to produce the cloth that they needed for the Mishkan. Hagoizis es hatzemer, shearing wool, melabnoi, washing it, menaptzoi, disentangling it, vatzoivoi, dyeing it, vatoiva, spinning thread, vamesach, warping. The first step of the weaving process is to extend the number of threads across a loom or other weaving device. These are called the warp threads, the shesi. Setting up the warp threads is in preparation for weaving is a malach of warping. So we could be marach and explain the whole weaving process, which we're not going to do now. And, so we have mesach and oiseh shnei batei nirin is setting two heddles. The heddles were the strings in which they set up the way that the heddles are the strings that hold up the rings that they would pass the threads through to pull them to turn them into the baguette. Va'orek shnei chutin, weaving two threads. Va'poteach shnei chutin, removing two threads. Kaishar, tying a knot. Matir, untying a knot. Va'tefer shtei tfiros, sewing two stitches. Hakarel manaslet for shtei tfiros, a tearing in order to sew two stitches. Sew two stitches sounds like a tongue twister. Now, a person who's kareh b'chamasa, so that's something else. So that may be something that's done in Melachos Machshavas, unless the Gemara says that the pshat is that it's a positive for him to release his tension and his frustration. So that's to be kareh manas litvar, but kriya bi'alma is not going to be chayiv. Hatzad tzvi, trapping a deer. Why dafka a deer? Because easier, other animals is not really considered trapping, and it was a very common example of hunting an animal. And if you catch a turtle, it's not going anywhere. Hashaychtay, shechting it, that means to make it bleed. Mafshitay is skinning it. Hamalcha is salting its hide. What's nichlal in this is for a hide to be usable as leather or parchment, it must be dried and then softened. This is the process of tanning. In those times, tanning involved salting the hide and soaking it in various substances. Okay, and then we have ma'abedas oiroi, tanning its hide. V'moichka smoothing the hide, Mechatcha is cutting the hide. HaKosev shtei oisios, writing 2 letters, V'moichka kamenas lichtov, erasing in order to write 2 letters. So writing at least 2 letters is the Av Malacha. They wrote a letter on each of the beams of the Mishkan's walls, on the krushims, that they could, when they reassemble the Mishkan, they could pair up each 2 beams exactly where they were meant to be, next to each other. And Moichek is Dafka Menaslichtav, because otherwise it's not a Melechas Machshavas. Haboina is building, Soiser is demolishing, also has to be Melechas Machshavas. Mechaba is putting out a fire. The Mavir is lighting a fire. When the Mishkan was being built, they kindled and extinguished the fire under the pot in which the dyes were cooked. Mamaka Beparta, striking a final blow, which included in this would be being Tovel Kalim, because now it can be used. And the 39th one is Hamaitzi Mershus L'Rshus, transferring objects from one Rishus to another. Harei Elu Avos Malachas Abam Chaser Achas. These are the Avos Malachas 40 minus 1. The Mishnah repeats the count to emphasize that there are only 39 Avos Malachas and not more. This is in contrast to the Tan Rabbi Yehuda, who hold that there are 2 more Avos Malachas, both of which are in the stage of the weaving process. The Mishnah therefore repeats that these are the Avos Malachas, Abam Chaser Achas, to teach Rabbi Yehuda's 2 additional Malachas are not Avos, but merely told us how the Malacha of Erig that was already mentioned previously. Mishnah Gimel. The Chacham said another rule about Shabbos. After listing all the Lamatas Malachas, the Mishnah discusses many of them individually. Continuing from the end of the list, it first deals with the Malacha of Hitzah. As a rule, a person is not mechuyev for Hitzah unless the item he carried out has significance, has a certain chashivus. The Mishnah defines what's considered chashivus in this context. So that's another klal that they said. It's a klal about Hitzah. And it's klal acher because we already mentioned klal gadol in the first Mishnah. So kol hakashel ha'atzniya, anything that's fit or normal for people to store, umatzniyan kamayu, and it's the right quantity that people usually store it, so that's considered significant. Meaning, if a person has 2 drops of orange juice on the bottom of a cup, that's not something that's significant. Or a smashed up plastic cup, that's not something that people are matzniya. So if a person carried it outside of Shabbos, he'd be mechuyev chatos. The Mishnah teaches here that one is not mechuyev for transferring a substance or material unless it meets 2 conditions. Number 1, it's something that people don't throw out but store for future use. And number 2, the amount that was carried is large enough for people to regard as worth keeping. The amount is important. The amount that's deemed important varies from one item to another, as we'll learn in the coming Mishnayos. So, but any substance or material that's not fit for people to store, or it's not in the quantity that people normally store, so it's not chashuv, so it's not significant. So if a person carried it outside on Shabbos, he wouldn't be mechuyev unless he's a person who doesn't in fact do it as significant in stores. If you save 2 drops of orange juice and you go out with that on Shabbos, you will be chayiv, but nobody else will be. Mishnah Dalet. Hamaiti teven kemloi pipara, somebody who carries out. So now the Mishnah is going to go through, as we mentioned a couple of times in the Masechta already. We're going to be discussing a lot about Hitzah, more than other malachas. So we're going to be focusing on Hitzah. So Hamaiti teven, someone who carries out straw, which is used to feed cows, is kemloi pipara, is only chayiv if he carries out enough to fill a cow's mouth. Since it's used to feed cows, a cow's mouthful is the smallest amount that people would bother keeping. Eitza or otza, what is that? It's a teven, it's a straw of a certain type of beans. Kimloi pi gamal, which is used to feed camels, so a person who carries this out on Shabbos is only going to be mechuyev if he carries out enough to fill a camel's mouth. Bean straw is not fed to cows, but it is fed to camels, therefore it's a camel's mouthful, which is larger than a cow, and a cow's mouthful is not larger than a cow. That's a small significant amount of in the case of otza. Amir is kimloi fi tle. Amir, what's Amir? So, is also from the stalks of grain. However, teven consists of the lower parts of the stalk, while Amir is the upper part of the stalk, which is the section that's cut off with the ear, where the grain is harvested, and it's softer than the lower section. So, Amir kamlai fi tle. It's used to feed sheep. With enough, a person's only going to be mechuyev for Hitzah if he carried out enough to fill a sheep's mouth. Asavim kamlai fi gdi. Grasses, which are used to feed young goats, or is only mechuyev if he carries out enough to fill a young goat's mouth. Ale shum v'ale betzalim, lachem kegregris. In the case of garlic leaves and onion leaves, the halacha depends on the state they are in. So if they're fresh, meaning lachem kegregris, if they're fresh and fit for people to eat, to the minimum is a shear of a dried fig. Yiveshim kimloi figdi. If they're dry and fit only to feed, goats, so the minimum shear that's needed for haitzah is in order to fill a goat's mouth. The Mishnah states the rule where a person transfers two of these substances together from one rishus to another. For example, half a shear of grain straw along with half a measure of bean straw. Right, so that was the first case that the Mishnah mentioned that gave the shiurim of what he's chai for and itzah, and they do not combine with each other to make up the required minimum because their minimum are not the same. Since each substance has a different minimum, each is viewed separately and does not combine with another to form an amount for which one would be chayiv. One who transfers edible food that's at least the size of a dried fig is chayiv. If one transfers different kinds of foods, if someone does haitzah with any kind of food, they combine with each other to add up to the size of a dried fig because the shiurim are equal. Since all foods require the same minimum measure, which is the size of a dried fig, they combine to form this measure. Chutz, miklipeyan, v'garineyan, v'ugtseyan, v'subanon, umursonon. However, excluded from this shear are the shells, pits, stems, coarse bran, and fine bran. These do not combine with the actual food to make up the minimum for edible food because they're usually not eaten by people. Rav Yehuda says, this is true of all shells except for the soft inner shells of lentils that are cooked together with the lentils. Since they're commonly cooked and eaten together, the shells combine with the lentils to complete the minimum measure. Ad kan Perek Zion.